evening, good afternoon to people from all over the world. This is podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Kovac. And in our podcast, we discuss a lot of different topics, especially about corporate culture, employer brand management, and of course, employee happiness. And today, with our guests, we will discuss a very interesting topic, people first culture. And before we are starting, I want to say hello to Sarah Siyani from United Arab Emirates. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Tatiana. Thank you very much for having me today.
Usually, before we are starting our conversation, I ask my guests to say a little bit about themselves, about professional experience, and about where private life they want to share for better understanding who they are as a person. Because usually we talk about people and people-centric culture, and which why we are not focused only professional but also a personal side. So, Sarah, please, could you share your life and your professional experience with us?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Tatiana. So, firstly, let me say that I'm delighted to be invited to speak to you and your audience about a topic that's very close indeed to my heart. As Tatiana introduced me, my name is Sarah Siyani. I am originally from the UK, from a town just northwest of Manchester by the name of Bolton. I now live and work in the UAE, where I've spent the last 10 years. 5 years of that was in Dubai, and the last 5 years have been here in Abu Dhabi, the place that I now call home. I'm 20 years into my HR career now, so please don't take that as an invitation to calculate my age. We'll skip past that part. And I've led HR and people and culture teams both here and in the UK, as well as in wider geographical locations across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia, in amongst that trajectory of my career. My most recent role was Executive Director of People and Culture for Alder Education, an organisation of over 5,500 people, where I led people and culture and the organisation through growth and transformation for 5 years before deciding at the end of 2023 to take some time out for my health. I think the other thing that I would add by way of introduction, which I think you will resonate with you when you hear some of the conversation that we are about to have today, is that I'm particularly passionate in the belief that people make a difference. And that is pretty much the motto that I personally lead with. So I'm really excited to be having this discussion today with you. And thank you once again.
Sarah, firstly, I want to start with my questions from better understanding. What is people first culture? What does it mean for you? How could you define it?
Yeah, of course. So I think what defines any culture, including the people first culture, would be the shared values, behaviours, the practices that guide how individuals interact and work together. Of course, there's the infrastructure to any business and culture that is absolutely fundamental. And by that, I mean the policies, the processes. Do we have systems in place that enable our people and the business to move forward? Are we staffed accordingly? Are we paying equitably? And so on and so forth. That is all key. But I have an unwavering belief that it is the micro moments, what I call micro moments, that truly keeps a culture alive and drives a people first agenda. So by that, I mean how we interact with one another, how we show up in our professional lives. So a values and competency framework is wonderful, but are we actually living it? Is every individual in that organisation, at every job level, in every department, across every job title, in every location, are they truly living it? Does the culture that we've created resonate with them? Does it matter to them? Do they understand it? And I think that's really key. A big centre of my belief in a people first culture is that people remember how you made them feel. So you can have the best written strategy and values framework and plans that the world has seen. But if a leader your manager or a colleague isn't doing what it says on the tin, isn't living, their every breath through that culture that's been designed for us all. And if that becomes frequent, my view is that that is as bad as, if not worse, than not having those values laid out in the first place. So I think my key summary of that is a culture and a people first culture is really important from an infrastructure perspective, but making sure that we live and breathe that every day in every interaction when people are looking and listening, and definitely when people are not looking and listening. That's true and key to me.
Mhm. Uh, when we are working in business, we understand that mostly the business is about results, it's about efficiency, it's about figures, it's about money. But why do you think, with your huge experience in business, but now for companies is very important to build a people first culture?
I think a people first culture in a business and in that business's outcomes and results is absolutely fundamental. So um, I have a view that when you hear these days the term soft skills, I always wince a little bit because I think that soft skills, leading with empathy, holding integrity very dear, creating mutual trust, accountability, and respect, these types of things, the way that we communicate with people, are fundamental to a people first culture. And but hearing the term soft skills or hearing a strategy or an agenda or a culture that has people at its center as potentially being soft, and this is something that I've heard, so I'm speaking from experience when I say this, and I feel particularly passionate about it. Having the two of those things, so having a people first culture and a focus on business outcomes, the two of those can and should sit side by side. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. I'd argue that a people first culture requires there to be a clear strategic proposition, a clear financial and commercial plan, a clear view about where the company is headed to ensure the longevity of employment, opportunity, and success for the people as well as the organisation. So I think it's really key. And some examples of the outcomes of a great people first culture would be things like improving the bottom line by making sure that your recruitment costs are reduced through retaining, engaging, and attracting people potentially in non-conventional ways, enhancing productivity, ensuring that you are utilizing your employees' engagement as ambassadors for you. So the company that I recently left, I'm very proud. I'm still very proud to say that we were the world's first private education group to be officially Great Place to Work certified. That wasn't an accident. That was by design. It took time, and it certainly wasn't all me or even the people and culture team. Every single person in that organisation contributed to making that happen. But what was happening at the same time that we were building that culture, was we were also doing better with educational outcomes for our students. We were also doing better from a commercial standpoint and our business outcomes. We were growing astronomically within the 5 years that I was there. So that is proof that both of those things, a people first culture and business results, can go hand in hand and can really complement each other very well.
Mhm. Usually we are starting to discuss the business from the perspective of strategy and also from the perspective of culture of mission of the business. How companies could align the strategy, mission, values, culture, leadership models, with ideas of people first culture, what they have to do from the C-level perspective, from HR perspective, what could you share from your experience?
Yeah, so I think from a strategic perspective, having alignment is really key. So a strategy is needed. A vision and a path forward is absolutely needed, and that can change over time because organisations can require something different and a different guiding north star, if you will, depending on which cycle of their existence they are in, and whether they are growing or they are fairly mature and it's something else that is the top of their agenda in terms of business goals. So I think a really clear and purposeful and deliberate alignment is required between the company's strategy, its mission, its values, its philosophy, and together, along with the key objectives of the organisation, together those things will then influence the way that work happens in terms of policy process interactions in an organisation.
Mhm. I think all of us know what the leadership models and how web leaders usually behave in the company in a different situation. This is a key to the culture. Uh, what could you advise? How to engage your leaders in all levels in building people first culture?
So I think that's a really good question because having and making sure that a people first culture is created or built and makes sense and is doing the right thing in terms of that particular business and its people, which is really key because no one organisation, regardless if they are very close competitors, no one single organisation is the same as another. So leadership and the role of leadership in an organisation is really vital. So communicating with your leadership team, ensuring that they understand and wherever possible are part of creating the story about the culture. So the story that we tell ourselves every day, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's when we introduce our company to a prospective client, whether it's us introducing our company to a prospective candidate and employee, whether it's media and press releases, in any way, shape or form, telling the story and making sure that enough people can do that is really key, particularly at the start of a culture creation. In terms of getting people on board with that thereafter, whether that be leadership or every other individual in the organisation, because I argue that every one person is important as another. Whilst leadership have a particular role to play, everybody in that organisation is critical to a people first culture and the chances of its success. So it's really about really clear communication, active listening, seeking to understand, clarity of thought and vision, helping people understand the part that they play, regardless of their role, the part that they play in your organisation and within that culture dynamic. And I think what's key about making sure that you're engaging people with it as well is thinking twice before making assumptions. There are certain assumptions that we can make. There's lots and lots of research out there about whether it be culture, whether it be leadership, whether it be retention, engagement, total rewards, all of those wonderful things and much more. But as I said before, not one single organisation is the same as another. I truly, truly believe that not one person is the same as another. So thinking twice before making assumptions and making sure that you do not overpromise. So potentially under-promising and over-delivering, not necessarily by purpose, but under-promising and over-delivering isn't necessarily going to be a bad thing, but over-promising and failing to deliver on a promise that's been made as part of a cultural transformation, I think could be nearly as damaging as not engaging people with the culture in the first place.
Mhm. It's really great what we asked. You started to talk about challenges, and my next session is also about it. What are main challenges could company have on the way to the people first culture?
Mm. So I think that often challenges can be to do with where the business is starting from. So, not always, but where the business is starting from. So, in an organization that hasn't really understood the true value of a HR or a people and culture function, excuse me, and often in those organizations, it could potentially be a challenge to begin with to even get the ball rolling, to understand what our North Star is, to understand what our strategic direction is from a people perspective. So I think being clear and deliberate with intentions and actions is really, really key when you are anticipating challenge or when you are handling and navigating challenge. And one of the other key things that I think is particularly key in terms of presenting a challenge is people. So I think whilst I would love for every organisation on this planet to be able to navigate a people first culture launch or a transition from a certain type of style to another style, for many different reasons companies go through this. I'd really, really love to be able to speak to HR colleagues, people and culture colleagues around the world and fellow leaders and hear that they've not had any challenge and that every single person has been on board. That's not always the case. Having a people first culture can be really new. It can be a really new concept to a lot of people. So similarly to my answer in the past question, being careful with assumptions. Don't necessarily assume that everybody understands what that is. So, in the very same way that we started this conversation, you seeking to understand truly my view of what a people first culture is, that's clear. Laying that out for people is really key. Even when that's happening, and there's much more to it than that, of course, but even when that's happening, people themselves can present a challenge. So either where there is a misunderstanding, a lack of understanding, it's something that they've not experienced before, could also be something they have experienced before, and sadly in that organisation where they have experienced it before, it may not have worked as well. It could also be leadership, leadership style. So, where potentially leaders may not necessarily be role modeling the desired behaviours that you've just created and set out around that people first culture. So, one of the things that could happen in those situations is what I'm going to call out as toxicity. So whether that's people, behaviours, misconduct, whatever it is, there is a chance that sadly that you can uncover whilst you're going through this program of change, you could uncover some toxicity. And I think it was Sir Richard Branson that said the hardest thing that he has had to learn to do in his entire career was to fire people, was to terminate people's employment. And bearing in mind that Richard Branson's philosophy and his values with the organisations he's created are very, very people-centric, I think that speaks volumes, because to be able to make sure that you're serving the other 10, 100, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people in your organisation, a leader needs to be able to spot and be willing to manage any particular toxicity or resistance to change from people, leaders included.
Uh, I think it's very, very important topic how to manage the changes in the company. And I want to ask the next questions. It's about communication and engagement employees in change. Because firstly we discussed the leaders, and now I want to discuss the employees. What is the best way for communicating? What do we need to have a special channels for feedback? What do we need to prepare for launching this type of culture for the whole organization, to all employees? What is the best, maybe from your experience, how we can do this, and what problems we could anticipate on this way, and what we have to take into account in planning our work with this huge change.
Sure. So I think my answer to the engagement of people and bringing them along the journey would be the same for the rest of the organisation just as much as it is for the leaders, because I I really, I mean, I'd said it in my introduction. I'm particularly passionate in the belief that people make a difference, and I think the organisations that truly thrive and for a long term and they build longevity around their people are those that understand the value of their people. Um, and so I think the alignment that I've talked about from a strategic perspective, the clear communication, being able to tell that story, being able to answer questions about it as well. And of course, there are going to be questions that you perhaps can't answer as a leader, either because you genuinely don't know the answer, and that's all right, or it could be that there is something particularly confidential about the answer, and therefore there are a select few people within a particular department or on your executive team that are the only individuals that should know about that at the time that the question is being answered. And that's okay too. But I've always felt, and I've taken this experience from managing, whether it be restructures, reorganisations, both in the UK and in the 10 years that I've been in the UAE. So I've always felt that the way that you communicate something is equally as important as what you communicate. Often it can be even more important and impactful. So being really clear and intentional with your messages, not shying away from saying that you don't have an answer if you truly don't have an answer, um, rather than dodging the question and therefore people don't feel that they're being heard. I think that's really key. In terms of your question about different avenues, there are lots of different avenues that you could seek feedback in. A concern for me would be where an organisation, or particularly a team, where people don't feel that they can truly be honest in their feedback. Because if you are an organisation that really cares about people's views, people's values, the fact that they are seeking to understand the changes that you're bringing about in an organisation for the good of your employees and the wider business, I think it's really, really sad when I hear people say that they do not believe that surveys are anonymous, or that a 360 is anonymous, or that, well, what's the point in filling in the survey? I know it's anonymous, but nothing's going to change anyway. So there isn't one particular single action that you could ever take to eradicate those fears, those judgments, those opinions and perceptions. It's going to be a culmination of small actions and small wins to be able to regain or build trust that might not already be there, trust and confidence, that may not already be there in an organisation that really cares about what its people feel and bringing them along the journey with them.
I want to ask you about resistance and about potential conflict in the situation when you decided to implement people first culture. You mentioned earlier that you can meet the situation of a toxic people, toxic team member. In another way, we could also have people who is not ready for changes, because it's normal for the people to have a resistance for something new. What is your advice? How, firstly, differentiate different type of resistance and understand that this is resistance which we have to work with, and we have to understand and how to do this. Maybe we need more dialogues, more communications, more explanations. And what we have done in a situation and we have really a toxic team member. What the problems, what the best way to the problem solving, the conflict solving in this situation, and what help us to overcome barriers of resistance to the change.
So I think that's a really good question. So in terms of resistance to change, or any change actually, any change that you're going through, I think a company really need to think through the change before they embark on it. And I think it's really key to commit to the change, whatever that may be, whether it's a new office, it's a rebranding, it's a new operating model, it's a new ERP system, whatever it may be. I think it's really, really key to think through the change that you are committing to, commit to it wholeheartedly, and create a proper change management plan with key milestones, with a really key communication plan. I think that's key. Again, not assuming that every step will lead to the next one, because we're dealing with human beings. So when it comes to something as fundamental as a cultural change, it's also not going to be an overnight thing. So it's not going to be the same type of change that you're managing as if you were implementing a new payroll system or a new time and attendance system or a new policy that talks about annual leave or whatever else it may be. Every type of change warrants a different approach. So from a people first culture perspective, I think a fundamental facet of a people first culture is understanding that very thing, that not every type of change is the same. You are going to need to make allowances for the fact that people will be reticent and hesitant to change. They will be resistant potentially. So a clear plan, leaving enough room for you to be able to pivot where you need to. There could be some really, really key pieces of feedback or key opportunities that you might miss if you are so particular about your plan that you leave no room for ambiguity or a curveball. So I think having a leadership team and people that are well equipped and are able and willing to deal with and navigate through ambiguity and change is really key. I think you asked about conflict as well.
Yes. How to handle the conflicts if we have in a situation of change? I think it's normal.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So, a lot of people, well, I've had conversations with fellow HR leaders and fellow business leaders, and I always find the concept of conflict and managing conflicting conversations, I always find it fascinating because, as you rightly have just said, conflict is natural. There's not one single human being in the same team, let alone in the same organisation and in the world. There's not one single human being that is the exact same as another. So the possibility for one person to feel differently about something or have a different opinion or feeling on something is immense. The possibility of that one person feeling differently about something to another is immense. And I think there's more chance that that would happen, far more chance that that would happen than every single person in a team or an organisation feeling in the exact same way about everything. So conflict is natural. It happens. Stephen Bartlett, in his book that I'm a keen reader of, The Diary of a CEO, actually says, and I completely agree with this, he actually says that friction can create value. And I agree with that. So there's a reason that the great leaders hire different skill sets on their team. There's a reason that if they are a particular type of leader, they may not necessarily look for their 5 direct reports to be exactly the same as them. And they might not necessarily look for their 5 direct reports to be the exact opposite of them. So I think individuality and respecting individuality with people is really key in business and particularly in a people first culture. The one thing that I would say when you have conflict is don't shy away from it. And I'm not necessarily saying encourage conflict, but what I'm saying is embrace the right type of conflict when it happens. So when it presents itself professionally, respectfully, and with the right interests and intentions, don't shy away from it. I think the worst thing that you can do is ignore it. Um, but there is a difference between a disagreement or a difference in opinion. There's a difference between that, which is fine, and the opposite or an alternative, which would be people potentially recruiting troops to back up that difference in opinion and a completely different view, and getting to a stage where individuals are perhaps not necessarily acting in a professional nature, and whether that be out in a public forum or behind the scenes, it still matters. So there was a study done by the Harvard Business Review a few years ago, and what they found, and this links back to the toxicity point, what they found in across tens of thousands of people in over 1,000 organisations worldwide was that one bad, or a very small number, but particularly referenced, was one bad, I'll say, apple can have such dangerous consequences for the rest of your culture if it's not tackled and it's not managed in the right way. So when it comes to people, I think it would be different depending on the nature of it, depending on how it's presenting itself. It would also be different in terms of whether it is a conduct issue or a capability issue, because for some, it really could be they understand fully how they are meant to be behaving in a particular way. They are choosing not to. That's very different than an individual that perhaps we've not done a good enough job as a leadership team in explaining the change that we're making. So I wouldn't necessarily always deal with every type of conflict in the same way. And I wouldn't necessarily manage every difficult conversation in the same way either. I think it's really key to respect and recognise individuality when you're bringing about change from a cultural perspective.
I want to mention the situation with mental health and employee well-being. Now it become more and more popular because otherwise we have a lot of discussion about burnout, about problem with mental health, about problem with psychological security. What do you think about employee well-being, about working with mental health of employees? How could it help us to build a people-first culture? What is your opinion?
I think that's another great question, Tatiana, and a hot topic. I think everything that we've spoken about today is a hot topic, but I might be biased. But well-being for me is particularly important. It's very, very close to my heart, and I don't mind sharing. I'm 20 years into a HR career now, and I have a tendency, and this is my personal characteristics, I have a tendency to care so very deeply about the job that I'm doing, about the organisation that I'm in, about the people that I'm there to service and its wider communities. I feel so very strongly about that I have a tendency to forget me in that. And that means that my own well-being, if I use myself as an example, isn't necessarily being prioritized. So I've spent a good chunk of my career encouraging, informally as well as formally, encouraging my team members, fellow executives, fellow leaders, business leaders, my line managers, people that are employed in the organisation, and those that are employed in an organisation that I'm not in. I've spent a great deal of time encouraging people to be mindful about their own health and well-being. And I've recognised across the last year that I've not necessarily done that anywhere near well enough for myself. So I think having somebody in an organisation it doesn't need to be people and culture. But having somebody in an organisation that is able to that you're able to trust and they're able to trust you, to be able to speak to them, to be able to share how you feel with them. Um, and of course, I'm sure that that happens with family members as well. Certainly in my case, it absolutely did. But I think making sure that you've got a circle of people, whether it's one, two, or four people, that you can count on to be able to check in with you and encouraging that mutual check in, because not everybody thinks about it in the same way. I think that's really quite key from an informal perspective. When it comes to a more formal approach, um, creating things like employee assistance programs, making sure that those things and the story around why they are created is really clear to people, really clearly spelling out the advantages, the benefits for people as well as their wider families, is really, really important. And I truly believe that well-being sits at the heart of this, because in my view, a people's first culture prioritises creating a supportive environment, one where employees feel safe to discuss their health or indeed mental health concerns or issues, and then access resources and support, whether that be through informal or formal channels. That's really key to me. So, whether that's offering mental health benefits, promoting a work life balance, providing access to counselling services, fostering a culture of openness and support, ensuring that managers, people managers, so individuals that have a responsibility for other people in the organisation, ensuring that they understand that their people um, need conversations sometimes that are not just about KPIs or a balanced scorecard or company objectives or team objectives or their performance review. Dealing with humans as humans, having honest, respectful conversations, making sure that people managers in an organisation are equipped to be able to have those conversations, because that, as you know, Tatiana, is an art form in itself. So doing all of those things together, I think, is really key. There's a company, there's a UAE based company called Mental, spelled Mentl. Here in the UAE, it's actually based in Dubai, and they are doing some incredible things across the last couple of years to shed light on research in this area, with particular reference to mental health and well-being in the workplace. So I think um, I truly, truly believe that well-being, whether that's mental health or all the other aspects of a well-being, of a well-rounded well-being strategy, they are central, pivotal to a people-first culture, because they directly impact employees, and employees directly impact a business result.
Sarah, thanks for answer for all these questions. And I have the last questions because time is coming so fast. Usually when you talk about something what you really like, and for me too. My last questions for you. If you give an advice, advice for C-levels, for HR managers about building people first culture, what is three main advice that you could give to them?
Three pieces of advice.
Three main topics which we have to pay attention.
This might take me a while to filter through and prioritize. I think I'm going to answer it a little bit differently, if you don't mind. I think your leaders are key. So as I've said, everybody in the organisation, regardless of job title, regardless of job level, is absolutely key. And I truly, honestly, sincerely believe that. However, the leadership team are are ultimately accountable for ensuring that the culture succeeds in terms of its strategic execution and where the business is heading. So I think making sure that you are hiring values fit and not just based on experience and skill sets written on a CV, I think is really, really critical. Things that I would look for when I'm hiring leaders, I'd really be looking for people that have either experience in or have the ability to be a transformational leader, people that hold integrity very dear, people that are able to and willing to and want to and are passionate about building trust and respect, emotionally intelligent leaders, people that are excellent communicators, and individuals that hold themselves to account before they hold anybody else to account. I think that's really key from a leadership perspective. I think the other side of it, um, thinking about the importance of um, of the rest of the organisation and its people, is hiring people and teams can often be the greatest single indicator of success or failure when it comes to an organisation's culture. So you can have the world's most experienced and expert HR practitioner or finance practitioner or digital transformation practitioner and a whole host of other things. However, if there is not a values alignment and a fit, a cultural fit, all of that expertise doesn't necessarily cut it for me, because ultimately you're going to be in a situation where you are going to need to unravel a lot of great work done culturally to be able to move forward positively. So I would never, ever, how do I put this? I would never, ever prioritize expertise solely an experience and skill set over a values fit. I think it's really, really important in any business, but particularly one in which is really serious about building a people first culture.
Sarah, thanks a lot for your time, for sharing your experience, for sharing your thoughts with our audience about people first culture, about employee well-being, and there are other important topics. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tatiana. It's been a really great conversation, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks a lot. It was podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Kovac, and stay in touch for the future episodes of our podcast.